Pandemic Parenting. I am your host, Greg Freeberry, and today we have a special guest, Ariella Lew, who is a former pediatric nurse and has started her own business, Kids on Track Consultancy, where she goes in and really helps parents when they feel like something is overwhelming them in their family, and then they can't handle it on their own. So it's a really beautiful business. We're going to talk a lot about it today. And we're also going to talk just about stress of the pandemic, what you can do to help mediate that, and just how to reconnect with your family in several different ways. So it's a lot of good stuff today. So I hope you enjoy what we got coming for you. And as always, go check out my website. I just posted a new blog, Think&Evolve.academy. And also go check out my Instagram, which is think.and.evolve. And I've been getting back into the habit of posting every single day. Sometimes I take breaks. I need a little social media break every once in a while. But yeah, I've been posting again recently, so go check it out. It's really good stuff on there. And without further ado, let's get to Ariella. Hello, and welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I am your host, Greg Freeberry, and I'm on a road trip today in Las Vegas. So that's why I got a little bit of a different background here. But on the show today, we have Ariella Lew, and she's the founder of Kids on Track Consultancy. So we're very happy to welcome Ariella to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. It's exciting. I'm looking forward.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's we're another one of the Aussies that I've been interviewing as of late. So it's good to have you on, even though technically it's Monday for you, right?
It is. It's Monday morning.
Yeah. So it's still Sunday for me, Sunday at 4 p.m. But it's exciting to have you on, and I know that you created Kids on Track Consultancy, and you were or are a pediatric nurse. And I'm just wondering, what was your journey from going pediatric nursing to creating this consultancy?
So I am a pediatric nurse. I'm still registered as a pediatric nurse. So I spent a lot of time at the beginning of my career in the hospital system and the community system, but just outside of the hospitals. And I really saw that there was a need for a more tailored approach in certain situations, particularly with regard to, education around parenting and what's normal and what's not, and child development and what's not, and just parents to feel supported in whatever challenge that maybe they're going through with whatever age their kids are. And that was really where the idea came from. And then over time, I moved out more and more into my own practice, and less in the wards, and less in the community settings, and got me where I am now, which is, full-time in private practice, which I love. And, no 2 days are the same, and it's terrific. I love it.
That's amazing. And what do you do in your business? What does Kids on Track Consultancy do for families?
So we work with families, helping to troubleshoot and guide them through any issues of child health and development. So that could be your normal, my kid's having tantrums, I don't know how to cope, or it's time for toilet training, can you help me, to sleep concerns, to developmental concerns about, I don't know if I need to get this checked out, is this normal? We do see people with chronic health conditions as well, and help troubleshoot how to fit those into the family and things like that in the best way. And when you get to the teenagers, we see things like bullying and school refusal and exam stresses, really anything that can, come across a parent's plate and they just feel like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to tackle this. I've read the books, but it's not working. The strategies aren't working. And we really aim to empower parents to feel that they are in control of what's going on, and they do have choices of, that whichever way they're choosing to parent is valid, whatever philosophy they want to use is valid, and that we are empowering them with strategies that can allow them to feel that they're doing a good job. And I think, it's such a hard thing to, as a parent, you've got to be thinking on your feet 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
All of the things change every day. Children change and teenagers change and adolescents change. And sometimes it can feel like every day just a new thing's being thrown at you. So I think really to hold parents' hands through whatever it is that they're facing. And obviously, as we discussed in the last couple of years with COVID, the need for that kind of every child is not the same has, I think, skyrocketed. And parents are really seeing, even parents with multiple children are seeing the way that one child's coped with homeschooling or wearing a mask or whatever the new restrictions may be totally different to how other children in their family have coped.
Yeah, 100%. It's the pandemic and COVID has really exacerbated a lot of those things. And so do you find that a lot of parents that come to you, they're just like totally exasperated, they are overwhelmed, they don't know what to do anymore, and they're just like, man, they're like, oh, I'm a bad parent, and you just try and kind of like turn that around for them?
Yeah, absolutely, we see that a lot.
Awesome. And how have you seen the pandemic really affecting the people that you work with? It's a really unprecedented time in a lot of people's lives. How has it been affecting families and parents and kids that you work with?
So I think there are, depending on the family and the age of the children, there's a variety of things that we've seen. I think, first of all, the biggest thing that I think is across the board that we're seeing, but I know psychologists are seeing, and I know a lot of people are seeing, is the idea of parents really not be knowing how to manage their own feelings around disappointment and uncertainty that they're feeling, whilst trying to guide their children through something that they've never experienced themselves and they themselves are struggling with. So, I think before the pandemic, families did see that. I'm not saying that's an unprecedented feeling, and they may have seen it at the time of bereavement or at a time of a family crisis or a divorce or something like that. But it wasn't, this was at one point in the pandemic, certainly here in Australia, restrictions were changing all the time and every day. And no sooner did you get used to one lot, then you got used to another lot. And, you were told something would end and then it wouldn't end. So it might be about a disappointment about that, a child had been promised a birthday party, or there was a family event that was going to happen. And I think trying to guide parents through navigating their own emotions while also helping their children to navigate those, I think that's something that we've seen a lot more of since the pandemic. And I think the positive side of that has been that as things have settled down in terms of restrictions, we're in certainly now a sense of COVID normal. So, masks in certain settings, but other than, and tests are required in certain places. But other than that, we're pretty much back to normal as people feel comfortable. But I think what that's allowed parents to do, certainly some of the parents that I'm seeing, is actually to be a lot more mindful now at how difficult it can be for children to navigate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like you mentioned, it's difficult for children and difficult for adults to navigate that change.
Right.
So I think it is important to pop in here for a second and just remind all the parents out there that you are doing a good job, right? Like Ariel is talking about, this pandemic was really unprecedented for a lot of us. And sure, it's very difficult for kids to go through that change, but it's also difficult for us as adults to go through that change. So, maybe you were feeling a little disappointed, sad, frustrated, angry. You had all a bunch of stuff coming up for you while your kids were also going through similar emotions, and you were maybe struggling to kind of guide them through this because you had never been through it before. And all that to say is it's okay. We all struggle. We all make mistakes sometimes, and you're still doing a good job. You haven't failed as a mother or failed as a father. anything like that, just because you may have had difficulty or challenge working through this pandemic together with your family. And as we kind of start to wind down towards the end of it, hopefully you took some lessons from everything, and now you're better prepared in the future to, handle anything that comes your way. Handle these big, massive situations, these global situations. It's stuff can keep piling on, but now you've been through it, right? You have that experience. You know how to navigate it a little better. And so, again, I just want to reiterate, be kind to yourself. You're a great parent. You're doing great. And we appreciate you having come to Think and Evolve to watch this. And Pandemic Parenting is here to help you. So, Ariella is going to start digging deeper into this and also offer you some advice for how you can keep working through this with your family and all that stuff. So stay tuned for all this great advice, but I just want you to keep in mind that you are doing great. So let's get back to it.
So I'm wondering, do you have any strategies for parents, like just in general, how they could navigate this pandemic and these changes and everything that's going on?
Yes, I think look, there's always a million strategies, and people can give you a million strategies, but I think the first thing I would say is it's very easy to feel when the whole world feels like it's changing that you've got nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to grab onto, and I really believe that isn't always true. In fact, I believe that's almost never true. I think there are things that parents can do within their own home to provide a consistency. And that doesn't have to be around times, but that can be around, on a Saturday morning, we always have waffles for breakfast as a family, right? You don't need to do that in a big crowded place. So those rituals from home, those routines from home, I think are super important, because that's what your child can grab onto at times of uncertainty. And I guess related to that, but still within it, the other strategy I would say, we talk a lot about quality time, right? That great word, quality time. And I think that it's something that actually in the pandemic almost got lost, because families, certainly that's what we were seeing here. Don't know what it was like over there, but certainly that's what we were seeing here. Because families were thrust together 24 hours a day, every day, all of the time. Most people were working from home. Most kids were homeschooled. There was no break. The idea of actually needing to spend one-on-one time nurturing the individual relationships within a family kind of got lost along the way, because no one's got the time for that when you can barely get work done because you've got to, monitor your kids in front of the computer. So I think remembering that in a family, just like with spouses or just like with parents or, as adults, work colleagues, relationships are key. So really, as much as it may go against what you feel like you want to do, really paying attention to the one-on-one time, the making sure that your kids, however old they are, still are getting their outlets with you to be raw and be honest and say where they are and what they're feeling. And I think also one of the strategies that I would have suggested a lot less before the pandemic is sometimes it can be so helpful for parents to also show that reality to their children. To say to their children, you know what, mummy's sad right now because whatever's going on. You know what, I'm disappointed. I'm so sorry that you feel that way. That validating your child's feelings and talking about your own feelings to show that emotions are real and that that's okay, because that permission in itself gives children a chance to be who they are.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point. I found in my own life, the more that I'm just kind of like open and vulnerable with how I'm feeling, it kind of engenders that in other people and helps me build a connection. And I'm sure that would really very well with parents as well.
Yeah.
And I also love that you talked about like just the consistency thing, because everything was like getting disrupted with the pandemic and online school. But, it doesn't have to be like a whole big thing, right? You said just like maybe like waffles on a Saturday, right? It's just like that small thing that's anchor that grounds everyone. And even when you just were like speaking about that, I was like, yeah, that would just feel like home in a lot of ways, and just like feel safe. So I think that's like a really awesome idea, and just remind parents out there that it doesn't have to be like some grand thing. It just can be something simple.
I think parents often put a lot of pressure on themselves.
Yeah.
I mentioned before that idea of quality time. I think
Mm-hmm.
certainly seeing in consults when I mentioned the idea of one time, you almost see parents' faces go pale and they're thinking they've got to take their kids out for a big outing or for baby tuners. And it really isn't that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's simple as you've got to drive to the supermarket. Is there one child that you can take with you? And while they're in the back of the car, you listen to their favorite songs with them. Because that's bonding.
Yeah.
Connection. That's how we connect.
Yeah, it's just those little things. And
things that make the biggest changes.
So sometimes it can feel kind of like you're floating, right? They're not grounded, not planted on the ground. And this has come up especially during the pandemic, like Ariella was mentioning. And one simple way that I love that she talked about to kind of just like reground yourself and your family to like hold on to some constancy is just set up those very simple rituals, right? Like a lot of our rituals got disrupted during the pandemic as far as work goes and school goes and just life in general, sports practice and, dance practice, all this stuff, all it got shut down. So you had to kind of find new rituals to ground, to anchor to. And one very simple way was like she mentioned, just like, all right, on every Saturday, we're going to have waffles together as a family. Because a lot of times I feel like, at least in my life, I feel like, it had to be some grand, spectacular thing, right? Like it's some like hardcore thing that we do. For me, or is it like, oh, I have to meditate for an hour every day, or I have to go work out every single day for at least an hour, like some like big time commitment or major lifestyle change. But in reality, you don't need a big ritual like that. I mean, they're not necessarily a bad thing, but if you can pull it off, but you don't need a big ritual like that to like have something to ground to. So something as simple as just having breakfast together or on a weekend day is more than enough. And it can really provide that space for kids to feel safe and just attached to that. Like, well, at least there's this like one constant thing in my life while everything else is kind of like tumultuous and all over the place. So just providing that one little piece is such a beautiful thing that you can do for your kids and your family. And it's also okay to just share with your kids where you're at too. Like if you're feeling ungrounded or unstable, like you don't have to like emotionally dump on them. I wouldn't suggest that. Like they're not your therapist or anything like that, but you can just share like, hey, I'm feeling a little sad or I'm feeling a little angry and this is why. And you can do it from a place of a mature adult talking to your kid, not so you don't like scare them necessarily. Like you're just like, hey, I'm feeling that too. So then you can just make a connection with them in that space. And then that can just like that little bit of vulnerability can really build an incredible connection with your kids. I do this a lot when I'm tutoring. I'll share, that maybe like a girl stood me up on a date or something and I'm a little upset, and like, I'm bummed out that it didn't really work out. Like, and, again, I'm not like, and then, I hate women and like, oh, my life is so bad and no one, women, like, I don't emotionally dump on my students, but just like giving them a little bit of that glimpse into my life can make me seem like not just a tutor, but a real person and a real connection is there. So that's something I also recommend. All right, now it's time back to Ariella with more amazing information.
The that idea of quality time, like you said, it was really like thrust upon a lot of these families. And one thing I noticed as a teacher is parents came to appreciate teachers a lot more because they had to like handle their kids. They're like, oh, this is what it's like. this is what it's like to teach my kid all day. Oh my gosh. Or like criminally underpaying our teachers. So I like that respect, but it was yeah, it's been really disruptive for a lot of people, but it's also been a chance to kind of reevaluate things and reframe things and gain new perspective as well.
Yeah.
And so now, like you said, we're kind of in this mode of COVID normalcy, and it feels like things hopefully seem like they're like starting to wind down a little bit as far as the lockdowns and the restrictions. And I'm just wondering if you had any recommendations for kids, because, you know, they've been isolated, they've been socially isolated in a lot of ways for a long time. And it's like, any recommendations for kids or families to kind of like re-enter social settings and after kind of being out of the game for like 2 years?
So, you know, it's a really interesting one. I get asked this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a few things that I think it's really important to bear in mind with that. First is that not everything that COVID forced upon us was bad. You know,
Agreed.
I think that the pace of life we lived prior to COVID, for kids as well, every day was after school activity. No, there was not, for a lot of the kids I work with, every day, no matter whether they were struggling academically or not, every day was a different thing. And every weekend was, you know, packed to the max. And that's great if your kids want it.
Mm-hmm.
But some kids actually, they're happy to go back to things, but they don't want to be as busy as they were before. They're enjoying being at home. Now, obviously, there's a line when that becomes concerning, but if it's a case of they're saying, you know what, I'm happy to go back to my martial arts, I'm happy to go back to my cricket or whatever it is, but I don't want to go back to this and this and this. I think listen to children.
Mm-hmm.
Not all kids want to go back to what it was before. Some kids are not as scarred by the pandemic as the adults. I think that adults, we are looking at the normal of, you know, 2019 and thinking this is what we've got to go back to. For most children and even teenagers, 2 years is a very long time in development.
For sure.
So when we're trying to get them back to 2019 and those normals, they were a completely different age and stage. So I think it's really recalibrating what we want those new normals to be. The new normal is not necessarily a return to pre-COVID normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's resetting a post-COVID normal. And I think that's super important. I also think it's important to be aware that in the same way adults have become a lot more aware probably of their own stresses and, you know, they've recalibrated life, so too, a lot of children and teenagers, we are seeing a lot more with them, some anxieties, some social, I wouldn't go as far as anxieties, but caution around certain situations. Some, maybe they're a little bit behind where their older siblings might have been at that point because they've had COVID disrupting. So I think to really, for some families, know your children. And if they are getting super anxious or they are saying to you no, really to listen and to have those conversations around why it's important that they're doing after school activities. Why is it important that we have birthday parties on a Sunday? Why is it important that we set up the play dates?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, as I say, for some children, particularly really at all ages, to be honest, that I see 0 to 18, they've missed a chunk.
Yeah, big time.
We've got to remember that within that chunk they've missed what is the norms of their peers. Mm-hmm. So I think really to understand why those things are causing anxiety, because our kids, they may not be familiar with them depending on how old they are. And the last thing I would say is to really think through for the kids that are finding it hard to re-enter, be it anxiety, be it their social skills aren't great, be it that school alone is overwhelming. And so anything additional they can't go. Think about starting small. So think about facilitating a play date with one kid before you're going back to, let's have 5 kids for a sleepover. Think about before they go back into after school activities, if you can afford it. And if there's an option, if you want them to get into, we'll use tennis as an example, you want them to go back to tennis, think about a couple of one-to-one coaching lessons where they actually redo those skills before they're back in a class. So thinking about ways you can start slowly rather than bang, we're going to jump in the deep end and see if you can swim.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I was actually talking to one of my students just the other day, and she's studying for the SAT. And I don't know if you guys have that in Australia, but it's, like a college entrance exam. And she told me, and I didn't really even it kind of hit me, because she was like, yeah, I really haven't had a final exam in all of high school yet, because I came in as a freshman in 9th grade, and then COVID started. And so everything, I didn't have to take finals, and the whole next year they're easing up on us, and I didn't have to take finals or any big tests. And now she's kind of taking the SAT, and she's freaking out, because she's like, I kind of forgot how to take a test. She just hasn't had that experience. And I was like, wow, that's so true. There's a big chunk of people, like you were mentioning, these kids that came into high school or 9th grade, and for 2 years maybe that got whole disrupted, and they've experienced totally different normals than maybe you or I. And so yeah, it really is very different experience for younger kids and versus adults who knew what normal was back then in 2019. And so yeah, so I'm just curious, do you actually advocate for more of a slowed approach than having every single thing planned and we got to do this activity and that activity? I know you mentioned reintroducing it slowly, but would you actually recommend parents take this opportunity to kind of cut back on things and focus on just what really is good for their kids?
So look, first of all, every child is different and every family is different. But I think I would say 2 things in what you're saying. That your last thing that you said to me is focus on what is good for their kids. And I think that what the pandemic, I hope, has taught lots of parents is that kids are, I know this sounds funny, kids are little adults. They're not a different species. They're not a different brand. And so in the same way that adults have things they like and things they don't, and don't want to be forced into situations that they're not comfortable in, neither do kids. And that doesn't make sense whether your child is 1 or whether your child is 21. They don't want to be forced. I think, again, going back to having those conversations with your kids and saying, right, how many days a week after school activities do you feel comfortable with? It's not saying don't have after school activities, but it was a case, and I think it was that for some families at least, the days were packed because that's just how it was. Not because it was mindfully thought through. They enjoy soccer, they enjoy baseball, they enjoy dancing, they enjoy piano, but more because in our aim as parents to have well-rounded children, the more we could expose them to, surely the better for them. But I think one thing that parents saw during the pandemic is, even during homeschool, which I admit for most parents was a nightmare, but one of the reasons, certainly for my clients, that it was a nightmare is it allowed them to see really where their children weren't coping. I'm not talking about the children who homeschool didn't bother them. They were merrily and happily at their desks at 8:45 to learn. But I'm talking about the children who may have been at their desk 8:45 ready to learn, but actually couldn't hold their concentration for most of the day. And parents saw that. So I think to remember that, yes, we've gone back to schooling in person, but school days are long. They are not short. And so whatever we're putting after our kids' school days, and even on the weekends, I think we need to think through exactly your words. Is it good for my kid? Not on the is it a nice to have? But is this something that they will value? Is this something that they are going to gain from? Is this something that's going to contribute to who they are as a person and to what they're able to give society? So I don't think it's about pulling back, but I think the many parents, at least that I see, if we're honest, the pace that a lot of people lived at before was probably not so healthy for us.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and it was like, it had a feeling of like just doing things just to do them instead of like, is this really like the right thing?
Yeah.
And
that's what I would say.
That's something I do give credit to my mom. When she brought me up, it was like, she did put me in a lot of things when I was young. And we tried this and that, but like, she paid attention to like, was I really enjoying it? Was I connected with it? And if I wasn't, then we just moved on, you know? So like, I got to experience a whole bunch of things, but then like, it didn't feel like my schedule was jam-packed with a whole bunch of stuff I didn't want to do. And I think she learned that from her mom, because her mom made her do dance and she hated dance. And so like, I think she didn't want to repeat like her mom. So she kind of let me do what I want to do. And I really appreciate that.
So I think the question, is this really good for my kids? Is it a great question to ask? Because like Ariel was mentioning before, and I noticed this with a lot of my own students and families before as well, is that things were being like, activities were being planned just for the sake of having activities. Like it was like, go, 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 do this, do this, do this, do that. And the pace was really fast. A lot of kids were really busy and they were overly stressed and they were trying to get their academics done. And they were trying to do all these activities and like they were hiring me because they couldn't handle it. And it's sometimes really important to just slow down. And like Ariella was saying, like that is one gift that COVID did give us, was the chance to slow down, because everything was shut down. So we didn't have a lot to do. So we could just kind of slow everything down. And now that we're starting to reintegrate, everything's getting back to normal. It is a really good question, is like, well, do my kids really need to like be part of all these activities? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not a good idea to put them in there. But sometimes the answer will be yes. And it is good to like put them back in those activities, whether it's sports or dance or art or, you know, video game club or whatever it is. And the interesting thing is that, you know, like it's a good question to ask, is this good for my kids? And to get their input, do they really want to do it or not? And the answer to the, is it good for my kids? Like, it may not necessarily align like with, do they want to do it or not? Sometimes you can have them do a certain activity, maybe like martial arts or something, and they may not be totally into it, but it might be a really good way to teach your kids discipline if you're feeling like they're really undisciplined or something like that. So you got to really feel into it and be like, is this genuinely good for my kids, whether they want to do it or not? Now, definitely get their input. Like, it's obviously going to be better for them if they genuinely are interested. But it's a good question to think about. Like, how do you want to raise your kids? What kind of values do you want to instill into your kids? Do you want it to be fun? Do you want it to be disciplined? There's a whole plethora of things you can choose from. So just keep that in mind as we're kind of slowly starting to end the pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed, and get back to what was somewhat normal life back in 2019. But again, like Ariel was saying, like, not necessarily normal like it was back then, but like the new normal. All right. So like, yes, activities, but maybe the new normal is slowing down a little bit and having a lot more free time. It's time to just relax and maybe decompress rather than go, go, go all the time. So something to consider. All right. Now we're going to start getting into the final part of the interview with Ariella. And she's going to start sharing some resources and all of that good stuff that you can use if you want to dig deeper into this topic. So let's get back to it.
I know that this pandemic's been stressful on families in general and kids in particular, but also, you know, just parents. And do you have any strategies for parents or recommendations for parents just to kind of like take care of themselves? Because I always feel like and you're able to take care of yourself better, then you're able to take care of your family and your kids better. So I'm just wondering if there's like, you have good self-care tips.
Look, I think self-care is different for everybody, but I think one of the things that many of my clients struggled with during the pandemic was this feeling of being on call 24/7, cooped up in a space. Now, obviously, you could go for your walks and you could do whatever, but I think very few of the mums that I know and the dads use that time to go for a walk by themselves. It was always when they were out with their kids on their scooter ride, particularly at this lockdowns in Melbourne, when we were only allowed out for a certain amount of time during the day or whatever it might be. I think rather than look at what self-care should be, I think, again, much like we talked about with quality time, it's about defining that. I think self-care does not, I think a lot of parents put their own needs for relaxation or want to just go easy on themselves on hold until they can get that spa day or that date night or that weekend away or whatever they're waiting for. And I think that's why a lot of parents very often, a reason at least, are running on empty. And I think if parents actually just are also able, much like we're trying to teach our children to, listen to their bodies when they're feeling stressed, when they're feeling overwhelmed, can they actually say, you know what, for tonight, I'm going to make school lunches in the morning. I'm going to go relax in a bath. I'm going to go watch a TV show on Netflix. I'm going to go just take a little bit of time. Doesn't necessarily have to be alone, but I'm going to go chill out. I'm going to spend 10 extra minutes with my kid reading their book, because actually I really like those snuggles before bed. And I'm saying that for the kids' benefit. I'm saying that for the parents' benefit. I know, you know, just talking for myself, I work in the evenings. I see clients a couple of nights a week. And sometimes when I'm putting my lot to bed, I do feel this pressure of, I've got half an hour, so you need to go down because I need to eat something before I can start again. And some nights that's great, and some nights my daughter needs me. And yes, my husband is more than capable of doing it, but I think that feeling of not just she needs me, but like I want to be in here.
Yeah.
This is where I'd much prefer to, you know, not saying cancel work meetings. That's not where I'm going with it. But sometimes to actually listen to our inner voices when they're telling us what our bodies and our emotions are craving, rather than constantly saying to ourselves, well, when I finish this, I'll do it. You know, one of the best quotes I ever heard, it was quite soon after I had a baby, is something along the lines of, you know, the laundry, the dishes, the pile of calls you need to make, it's not going to be any smaller tomorrow.
Yeah.
There'll be more dishes, there'll be more laundry, there'll be more tasks you have to attend to. So really to be able to take the time that you want to take to give yourself a minute. I don't think it has to be about an expensive yoga class or a pampering or a date night. I think it has to be about sometimes being kinder to ourselves than we have the, I guess, natural capacity to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like in a lot of what you're saying is, you know, yeah, the pandemic was stressful in a lot of ways, but it also gave us this opportunity to kind of slow down and reevaluate things. And it sounds like what you're saying is just, yeah, like really pay attention to just what your kids are saying and pay attention to how your own body feels. Like, and instead of just trying to rush, do all the things, just like really slow down and listen to your body, to your family, to your kids. And it's kind of like a common theme I'm noticing through everything that you're saying. All right. Well, Ariella, this has been a really productive conversation. I'm wondering, do you have any more like resources as far as like books or apps or videos or anything like that that you might recommend to parents if they want to explore some of this stuff deeper?
So I think not necessarily apps or resources, but I think, well, the one thing I would say is considering for kids particularly, we've talked a lot about tying into emotions and relaxing. And one of the things that certainly I've seen from the pandemic is one thing that seems to have been affected kids of all ages is actually their sleep. I've seen a huge amount of kids have sleep regression, all kinds of ages, particularly as we enter this new normal. So I think thinking about looking up a really good meditation app that you can do with kids before they go to bed. And for the littler ones that aren't quite ready for that, doing something like sleep stories on YouTube that just allows them to wind down and let those worries go. I think that can be quite bonding, but it can also be quite helpful for before bed. I think thinking about introducing activities within your home that allow you as a family to connect. Obviously, there's the ones that we talked about before, like waffles breakfast on a Saturday, but you've also got things like, are you having those family dinners? Not so you're just forcing everyone to the table, but more that chance to connect. That day you're going to talk about where does the whole family want to go for holiday so that everyone's views are included. I think things like that, going back to basics, really.
Okay, back to basics.
Rather than apps and resources.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. And yeah, have you found that sleep disruption has been really impactful for a lot of the kids that you work with?
Particularly as we're going back to normal.
Okay, so yeah, that's something definitely to watch out for.
Yeah, because I think, look, and I can only talk for here in Melbourne, obviously, but I think the messaging, if you think about the messaging, for 2 years, certainly in Melbourne, kids were basically sent the message of COVID dangerous, COVID dangerous, COVID dangerous, COVID dangerous. Now suddenly we're back in school with no masks, and I'm not critiquing that, but for some kids that's a very confusing. That messaging is confusing.
Yeah.
And often when things are confusing to kids, it's at night that they're processing what's going on. So they're in the middle of the night, they're struggling to fall asleep. And when I sort of get parents before kids go to bed to have those conversations about what made you smile today, what made you cry today, what worried you today, there's a lot of stuff that's coming up.
Okay, so parents, be mindful of your kids' sleep because that's when they're processing things.
Yeah.
All right, amazing. And finally, I just wanted to ask you, if parents want to learn more about Kids on Track Consultancy and you and all that good stuff, where could they find you on the internet?
So they can find my website, which is extremely outdated, which is www.kidsontrackconsultancy.com. But a lot of the up-to-date stuff is either on Instagram or Facebook. So if you search Facebook is Ariella Lew of Kids on Track, and Instagram is Kids on Track Consultancy. I'm on there, so I don't know if you can put those links on under the show. That would be great.
Yeah, I'll share all those links in the description of the show and everything.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah, well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to talking again soon.
Yeah, maybe we'll get to talk again soon. I hope to see you again. All right.
Sounds good.
Have a good rest of your day in Australia.
Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
And finally, it's time for the wrap-up recap. Yeah. So today we talked a lot about the pandemic, and really I think the overall theme was just to kind of slow down with your families, slow down with your kids, slow down with yourself, feel into what your body's telling you, listen to what your kids are telling you, and try to recalibrate and reestablish the new normals now as we start to emerge from the pandemic. And then Ariel also touched on a little bit at the end about sleep, how important sleep is, not only for kids, but for adults as well. If you're running on a lack of sleep, it's just, I probably don't have to tell you about all the terrible things that it does to your body and mind, and, just get the right amount of sleep. That's all I'll say. So it's a little bit of a shorter episode today, but it was still jam-packed with a lot of amazing information. So once again, thank you so much for joining Pandemic Parenting. And until next time, I love you all. Bye-bye.